have pointed out, if the federal government can actually mandate that each citizen purchase something from a third party that they may not want, may not feel that they need, if they can actually do that, is there actually any limit to what they can't do?
No, I mean, we already have a system where corporations heavily lobby the government, and it's turning to where they really choose. Their advertising expenditures are not really into telling people about the great products and services they have. They're into lobbying the government to control the market, and that's really what this is. I mean, I think we could have a future where there's a mandate that you have to buy the Chevrolet car or really anything.
Mm-hmm. And you know, Phil, the old saying, of course, is that you never want to see the law, the sausage or the law being made, right? I mean, you know, you don't want to be an observer of either one of those. But we really got a double dose of how unsavory this whole political process is, just by the way that this thing moved through the halls of Washington, D.C. You know, certainly there's never been legislation of this magnitude that has been ramrodded through by one party in power without any votes from the opposing side. Certainly the way that the House didn't vote again on the bill but voted to accept the Senate's bill and all that. Your comment on just how this process unfolded?
I think it's kind of business as usual. I really don't think the people in Washington care what the regular, average, everyday person feels about these issues. I think that guy that told me people are stupid, people can't make choices for themselves, I think that's probably the common attitude of the people that push this through. They don't really care about you making your choice. They think they're smarter than you. You don't know what's good for you. They think that you're basically a child, and that they're the mom or the dad, and they know what's best for you.
Yeah, and that is pretty scary, isn't it? I mean, that is actually the reaction that we've seen from Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, and other leading Democrats when faced with a reporter who might say, you know, boy, public opinion really shows people are against this, or what do you think about the fact that people are rallying against this, and things like that. And what has their reaction been? Well, as soon as people find out more about it, they're going to support it. So this whole notion that the people themselves don't know what's good for them, the ruling class, the elites do, and once people actually see that they get some kind of a monetary benefit from this, everybody's going to fall in line.
And they're hypocrites too. They're passing legislation this doesn't even affect them. They have this whole other separate set of rules, guidelines. This doesn't even affect them. They're not involved. They aren't forced to do any of it.
Yeah, that absolutely right. And you know, Phil, one thing that's been very disturbing to me throughout this whole process, if you will, is that this attitude about once people find out what's in the bill, they're going to like it, or once they find out they get a benefit, they're going to like it. My key point is, if we are truly at a point in society right now where the concerns, the legitimate concerns around what is the relationship between the individual and the government, what is the proper role of the federal government, how much does something like this health care plan cost, if all of that becomes secondary once somebody finds out that they individually get some kind of a benefit from a new program, if that's the prevailing wisdom, if that's the situation that we're in right now, the American experiment, the noble experiment, is over. We're done. As a country, we're done. If it's actually devolved to that point, where the way somebody evaluates something is not these philosophical issues and distinctions that have guided our nation for 200 plus years, if we've gotten to the point now where people just look at it and say, okay, do I get more or does it cost more? If we got to that point, it's over.
Well, that's the way people are now. Unfortunately, I think it might be over. I forget the congressman's name. You can Google this, but the congressmen are saying, I don't really care about the constitutionality of that. It doesn't affect my judgment. And I think it's because people are. They say when you're willing to rob Paul to pay Peter, you get Peter's support. And it has turned into what's in it for me. And people don't care that it's going to have long-term implications. It could hurt the country. I mean, Social Security might actually be bankrupt right now, and yet we're expanding the scope of government programs. That's just madness. And it's really selfish, too. It's selfish.
Yeah, you know, I've often wondered, you know, that a few years ago Tom Brokaw wrote a book called The Greatest Generation. It was about the sacrifices that people made in World War II. It was kind of the generation of his father and things along those lines. And I've often wondered if we don't curtail some of these entitlements, if we don't address the shortfalls in Social Security and Medicare, and heaven forbid, this new health care legislation, are we in essence going to be known as the selfish generation because we made choices, basically just gave a hot potato to the next generation coming up?
Well, the thing is, and people do, they tell me when I talk out against these programs, they say, oh, you're selfish, you hate the poor, and you don't want them to get things. And it's not that. I always, philosophically, I separate what I want from what the government does, because really, at the end of the day, what the government does is separate, and government mandating this, increasing the scope and the cost of government, it's going to end regardless of what I say or do. It's not that I don't want the best for America. I do. This thing is basically turning into a big Ponzi scheme, and these things always fall apart, and that's going to destroy all the people it was supposed to help.
And very, very well put. You know, Phil, you know, obviously you know this. A lot of our viewers on this program probably know this as well, but you know, you really don't have to go back very far in American history to find when the dynamics in terms of the role, the size, and the scope of the federal government expanded very dramatically. This is not the type of thing where the current structure we have right now is something that our founding fathers envisioned, or it certainly doesn't embody the principles that the country was founded upon. We really go back to the time of the Great Depression, World War II, Franklin Roosevelt, and the New Deal, where we have this massive expansion of the federal government. And we really have, even at a time back then, when FDR was proposing all these new programs, all these new government agencies, the Supreme Court started to kick this stuff back and said, hey, this is not constitutional, it is not authorized. His response was to threaten to pack the Supreme Court with more justices than are currently on there right now. With that threat, the court started to kowtow down and started to approve these various things. But to his credit, even, and I didn't realize this until I went back and looked at some source documents, to his credit, even FDR realized Social Security, he saw that as being a temporary program. He never saw that as being a permanent entitlement. And we've seen with Social Security, we've seen with Medicare, and unfortunately I think we're going to see with this health care program, that once you put an entitlement in place, there's never any function to contain costs. There's always more demands put on the system, and invariably these things grow, become underfunded because they can't be funded fully, and run the risk of bankrupting the nation. Do you see anything different with this health care legislation?
No, in fact, there's no actual, I mean, we're libertarians and hopefully people choose to elect us, but right now our voice isn't heard in Congress. So there's no voice for cutting spending at all. You have the Democrats who are saying, let's add this whole new thing. You have the Republicans, and I think some of them would be for this if they weren't in the minority. I think some of them are voting no because they know it'll still pass, but even so, I posted this on my Facebook. Down in Mandarin, I went to the local Republican Party headquarters. There's a sign in the window that says, if you cut my Medicare, I will not vote for you in the next election. So you have expand, add new stuff, or don't cut the New Deal, don't cut all the current programs. There's no voice in Washington saying, wait a second, we're devaluing our currency, we're bankrupting our future. Nobody is.
And Phil, doesn't this actually get back to the very, very important issue and perhaps the most core of questions, which is, what is the role of the government? And what should the government be doing? And what are its responsibilities and what are its limitations? And you know, the old joke is, you know, you can't be partly pregnant, you know, you either are or you aren't. And government is either contained by what is listed in the U.S. Constitution in terms of what its prescribed roles are. It's either in that box or it is outside of that box. And this whole notion of, well, we kind of want it to be a little bit outside the box here and a little bit outside the box there, we know that once it gets 1 foot outside, it just morphs and it expands and it becomes, it really becomes uncontrollable, because when you have a situation where you have very defined benefits, meaning certain people get certain benefits, but very diffuse costs, you know, the people on Capitol Hill, the people in Tallahassee, the people at City Hall in Jacksonville, they always get a knock on the door and they always hear from the people that are going to be there to get a benefit. They don't hear from always hear from the people that are paying the bill, who are going to be saddled with more taxes, et cetera, to pay for these bills. So isn't the core question, don't we actually have to get back to basically asking, what do we want the government to do versus what should individuals do?
We do, and the problem is, I hate to get into the people are dumb, but the people don't actually know about the cost of government, because the costs are diffused and the benefits really, they are really all in one place. And people don't realize the taxes are so confusing, and people don't really know what they pay in taxes. And this is from people telling me. I've had people tell me I don't pay taxes, and I ask them one simple question: do you work? And if they say yes, I'm like, you pay taxes. I don't care what your federal return says. You had 10 to 15% from FICA and all this other stuff, so you did pay taxes.